service to humanity is one of the most noble and one of the most righteous undertaking that a human being can involve themselves in. And perhaps one of the reasons for this is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ennobled us, has ennobled the human being, and He has preferred him, He has raised him in ranks over the rest of His creatures. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, وَلَقَدْ كَرَمْنَا بَنِي Adam. Indeed, we have ennobled the son or the children of Adam alayhi salam. And the perspective of serving humanity becomes even more lofty when we put our own lives in danger. And this is something that our guest on the show today is placing herself in a situation where her own life is in danger in order to serve humanity, in order to take care of the needs of human beings. Our guest on today's program is Dr. Uzma Alam. Welcome to the show, Dr. Uzma.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
As a way of introduction, Dr. Uzma Alam is an academic and entrepreneur with a PhD and a MPH from Yale University, working at the intersection of infectious disease and healthcare delivery in the international development and humanitarian context, where she applies data to inform and influence policy and programs. She has a diverse multicultural background comprising of international experience. She's worked in 4 continents, serving with academic, non-profit, corporate and governmental agencies, including advisory commissions and corporate council. Uzma is a founder editor of the Yale Journal of Health Policy, Law and Ethics, one of the most cited legal publications in the world within the field of health, medicine, psychology and psychiatry law, and a grant reviewer for the US Center for Environmental Health, evaluated at $62 million plus worth of grants. She is currently a board member of the Association of Yale Alumni in Public Health, AYAPH, and a reviewer for the British Medical Journal. As a humanitarian worker, Alam has been deployed to the front lines of outbreaks in Liberia, Sierra Leone, Guinea, Somalia, Uganda, Honduras, and Haiti, where she has worked to combat Ebola, measles, and cholera, among other infectious diseases. As for the COVID-19 pandemic, she serves on the African Union / Africa CDC Technical Working Group and on the Committee for the National Muslim COVID-19 Response Team, reporting to the Ministry of Health, Kenya. In addition to being a team member of the Africa Data Science Initiative that seeks to model and map the trajectory of COVID-19 on the African continent, its economic impact, and the capacity of country-level healthcare systems to adequately respond to the pandemic over time. The team has recently published the first of its kind COVID-19 prediction model for Africa. And inshallah, we'll talk about this in detail. Presently, she serves as a technical advisor on operational research and policy in the humanitarian arena, is a co-founder of a management consultancy focused on global health management and technology in the emerging markets, and an investor in a biotech firm in the USA using artificial intelligence and microelectronics for pathogen detection. Her work has appeared in peer-reviewed journals, international media channels, and gained several accolades. In her spare time, she is a voracious reader, enjoys traveling, and has run several marathons, including the New York Half. Uzma is passionate about taking a data-driven, culturally embedded approach to global health, incorporating science, technology, and innovation, STI, to strengthen global health within marginalized populations. Through all this, she is hoping to bring equity to some of the most vulnerable communities worldwide in a bid to drive social change. Now, some of her select achievements: she has done research and it has been published in Lancet. Her research has been published in Lancet, ranked top 5 in the world. She's a guest of the Columbia University Disaster Politics podcast, a podcast exploring the intersection of policy and legislation with disaster preparedness, response, and recovery, to discuss how geopolitics can force international disasters. The episode has been ranked as the 4th most listened to of all times. Her research has been cited by President Obama's Presidential Commission for the Study of Bioethical Issues. She has developed a strategic plan for the first national ambulance service for Sierra Leone, and this was debated in their parliament. She led the launch of a first-of-its-kind report in Kenya that explores national health progress over 2 decades and examines the health policy implications. She established the Kenyan National Target Setting Metrics for Non-Communicable Diseases, NCDs, as a nominated member of the Kenya Ministry of Health NCD Task Force. Genome Sequencing Project sets a fly team member. She set up the first molecular HIV diagnostic laboratory in Kenya. Sigma Psi Honor Society elected as a full member. USA National Postdoctoral Association Vice Chair. Association of Women in Science CT Chapter Secretary. Reading for the Blind and Dyslexic Society Reader. Dr. Uzma, as is normally the case in our program, we will start off before we will eventually go into the myriad achievements that you have, which has taken me a substantial amount of time in enumerating, mashallah. But to start off with, if you could take us back to your early years and give us an idea of who you are, talking about schooling, your family background, the schools that you went to, how was it for you in the early years?
Sure. Before I start, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you to have me on the show, and a very generous introduction, and also to the Al Huda team. I've had a chance to work with them in the past, and it's been a pleasure. So I'm very happy to be part of this program. In terms of my background, early childhood, I grew up very close from down the road from here in a joint family. So I lived in a family where, mashallah, at one time we were up to 4 generations under the same roof. So my grandparents, my parents, my siblings, and then my nieces and nephews, all under one house. So you could imagine, the diversity and the noise and the joy in living in a joint family. And beyond that, I was very lucky to come from a family that till date has always integrated our neighbors and friends. So it was one of those open houses where we had influences of all sorts of people come in and out. And it was just a very pleasant time. In terms of schooling, my primary education, I went to Kilimani. And then from there, for my high school, I went off to, again, a school very down the road from here, St. Austin's. And again, both schools. And at that time, growing up in Kenya, I was very fortunate enough to have not only a very diverse and multicultural family background, but also I believe at that time, the Kenya curriculum, we were very fortunate in that it was very broad in its thinking. So I remember covering, our social sciences, our maths, our English, and then, the insistence on having a language to study. So we all had to study an additional language, and obviously Kiswahili and English were not considered a language. So you had to go into a third language. And then something that I think is a miss these days, we also had a component of religious education. So whether it be Islamic education, or at the time RE, the Christian religious education, you're engaged in the whole concept of religiosity in a brighter prospect. And then obviously we had our sports curriculum, which was something that I had enjoyed, and I've come from a family that was very involved in the sports. So that was my background in a nutshell.
Do you think so? You crediting the syllabus, the Kenyan syllabus in those days. Did it give you a sort of a holistic approach to life? Did it give you a broader outlook towards what you wanted to do later on?
I think at that age, obviously, we were too young to realize what it was, but obviously it set this foundation for integrating knowledge from different levels. And it also gave you, something that I come to appreciate later, especially in my work, is this acceptance of tolerance and inquiry, right? And it gave me this base to work off. So it's something I truly appreciate now, obviously in hindsight. And then it was like, why do I have to do all these subjects? Do I have to do this? What is the point?
Right. So was this the 844 system that you were a part of, or was that is that was it the 844 system?
No. So I went through the GCSE system.
Right. Right.
I went through the Kenyan secondary school, I went through the Kenyan system, and then
Right.
high school, I went through the.
Right. Right. Now, your the family environment at home, how enabling was it, and how encouraging was it for you to achieve what you did in your school?
Wow. So if it wasn't for my family, I wouldn't be where I am today. That was something I knew right from the beginning. And the reason I say this is multifold, right? One, I had very encouraging parents that believed in the value of education. In fact, I remember one of the first conversations, the first thing that stuck in my mind about the Quran was my mom saying to me, that the first proclamation that came down as Islam was the word Iqra, which means read. And it did not specify read the Quran or read XYZ. And like you mentioned, I enjoy reading, and that's something that has stuck with me since then. So I had very encouraging parents, and then obviously living in a multi-generational family structure, you do get spoiled. I was one of, the younger ones, and I was one of the few girls, grew up with boys. So I always got, the extra space and extra time to do what I want and to explore. So yes, for sure.
Excellent. So you finished your schooling in Kenya.
Yes.
During your early formative years, is there something that you could point out to us, maybe a point of inflection, a point which something that was monumental enough to change your life or to decide what course you are going to take later on? Is there anything that comes to mind as far as that is concerned?
So it was not necessarily a thing. I couldn't say I wanted to be a mathematician or I wanted to be an academic. I mean, in all honesty, I hadn't even been exposed to academia. I was one of the first in our generation to go to university, let alone being a woman and being sent abroad, which was something totally different. So it wasn't necessarily, the exposure of being wanting to be an architect or XYZ. I mean, there was one thing that was clear I didn't want to do was be an engineer, because all the men around me were engineers, and I was like, no, that's the one thing. But there was this bigger, I wouldn't say drive at that time, I didn't understand it as drive, but there was this driving factor in me that I knew I needed to get an education. I wanted to get an education. I had seen the value of what this can do. And bigger than any of that, I had in the background my family counting on me and their support. And I remember my grandma's prayers till this day, every morning when I went to school, like, you need to do something. So I had that inspiration, that was the path, but it wasn't necessarily a planned path that, you need to do the sciences and then you can go into academia and you can go into research, that.
Dr. Uzma, moving on, what made you go into public health?
Wow, so it's been a very long journey, and it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't something planned, but very fortunate to be where I am today, and very passionate about what I do. But I was very lucky in the sense that I had one, like we said, right? I knew there was something I needed to do, and then the question was what and where do the resources come from? And it's a very interesting story of how I actually started where I did. So at that time, there used to be university fairs, and there was a fair at the British Macmillan Library hosted by the British Council. So I was walking around with my friends and going to, all these booths, and all of a sudden we reached one booth, and there was this whole big poster about biochemistry, right? I honestly had never heard of biochemistry. So, I was reading it, and I remember this fellow behind it, an elderly gentleman, engaging me in conversation. And we started talking and XYZ. And then he says to me, so you stopped by here. Are you interested in biochemistry? And I was like, yes, very. And I obviously didn't have a clue what it was, right? And I was hoping like he wouldn't ask me anything further. And hold behold, what I came to learn from that conversation was that they actually had sponsorships available for students in Africa to go pursue biochemistry in the UK in a bid to strengthen science in Africa. So I very excitedly went home and announced to my family that I'm going to the UK, right? And it was, like I said, it was unheard of. Nobody from our family had actually gone abroad. I was the first person in our generation. And there was this mixed response, like, yeah, we'll see, or we'll see what happens. So obviously, I sat down, I applied for these applications. My sister-in-law that time was working in a bank, and there were no computers and stuff, and she really helped me like fill in my application forms, make photocopies, mail them out, fax them and stuff. And all along there was this whole debate of, should we let her go? Can we let her go? The society things, right? Culture thing. How will it work? How won't it? But the strongest supporter I had in my corner was my mom. I remember breaking down a few times, and she was like, look, just have trust, just believe, we'll work it out, we'll work it out. And luckily, just before I finished my A-levels, I got a letter in the mail saying that I'd got this scholarship and was I interested in biochemistry. And then I was like, okay, I need to learn something about what is this biochemistry. And so that's how I got into the plane, got to the UK, and the hardest years of my life for a number of reasons. And, I'll be happy to discuss those. But also, unfortunately, at that time, the most boring subject that I'd ever done, right? It just didn't engage me. And I knew I had an education, but then the next question was, now what?
So you were studying something in which you had no interest.
No interest, and I
That must have been
didn't know
torturous.
it. That's the word I didn't want to use, right? So imagine your first year of university,
Right.
your first undergraduate degree being torturous, right? But there's a blessing in everything. I think the blessing in that was that obviously it brought me back home, but I'd started out on a pathway that wasn't about, how much can I make or what. It was, the idea was when I came back was what opportunity can I open? What opportunity can I take? And then from there, my career, eventually built to where it was. So initially I came back, and my first job I was offered was by KEMRI, the Kenya Medical Research Institute, but it was all the way out in Western Kenya. So again, there was this conflict at home. How do we let her go? How don't we? And, it was, again, like, my parents know this story now, but in those days they didn't. The conversation I had with them was, Mom, Dad, I've been offered, there's this opening, I'm really interested in it, but they're interviewing me in Kisumu, and they couldn't understand why Kisumu, right? Because I hadn't told them the job was in Kisumu. They just had me home after so long, right? Again, working in the most rural parts of Africa. So again, we had this tussle, and I knew I was going to take the job. I knew it was going to be in Kisumu. I ended up there, and then every day was like, what's happening with your interview? Why aren't you coming back? And it was like, oh yeah, I'm under training. And, we eventually sorted our differences. And that was the moment that really sparked my interest in public health. And I remember it's a very vivid story in my mind, but a very sad story. It was actually the first time that I saw a grown man, not a woman, cry. and those raw emotions. I'd never seen a man break down. And this was somebody who we were very familiar with. He worked around the area we worked with, and he was the caller of one of the church bells. And one day, you know, I just saw him standing there, broken down in tears. And you know, we had this conversation, and I remember asking him, like, what's wrong? And he had just lost his son to something as simple as malaria. Right? And there I was living in Kisumu, right? And that time my salary was like was $200, so less than 200, you know, 2,000 Kenya shillings. Being safe, being able to afford this, and there is somebody right opposite me, a human being, a grown man brought to that level, right? And there was just something so raw in that emotion that that just triggered it. I just knew that it's going to be public health. And from there, you know, I started charting what is the next, what is the
That
next
was
step?
sort of the it was
Where
the
do I
turning
go?
point for you.
It was.
And all along, I mean, what the sort of the narrative that keeps on coming back at you again and again is that you had to fight cultural barriers. You had to overcome cultural barriers at every step of the way. And Alhamdulillah, you managed to do that, and you managed to progress, and you managed to move ahead. If you had given in, it would have been a different story then, wouldn't it?
I had a very strong backing. Like I said, my family and friends wouldn't. So unfortunately, it was more me putting them in the way of fighting this cultural battle as much as
Right.
they wanted this for me, they wanted this for their daughter.
Right.
But they were the ones faced with the questions like,
So,
how can you send your daughter?
so you had
Why are
strong
you sending
allies.
her?
So you had strong allies,
Very.
and then they took on cultural norms of the time.
They did.
Ah, mashallah. So you went to eventually you went to Yale University as well, one of the 8 Ivy League schools in the U.S. Mashallah. And what is your experience there in the U.S.? Like, were there a lot of Muslim girls who are in university with you? How's the education as far as Muslim women are concerned in the U.S.? How do the Muslims in the U.S. approach education?
So that's a very interesting question. So when we talked about my initial university, and I said, you know, it was one of the hardest years of my life, and that was because all of a sudden, right, I had been from this very understanding environment where we grew up with Christians, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Punjabis, Africans, you name it, right? Europeans, whoever, right? And to me, it was a very understanding, collaborative environment, right? It never put me in a position to question my gender or my religion or my iman or my career path, right? Like you said, it was very, very supportive. So in honesty, right, I'd never even considered, like I said, you know, we in school, we learned all the subjects and there were subjects, right? I'd never even considered this overlap between religion or religiosity and the sciences. It never was, right? And then here I go to university, this is my undergrad, and I'll come to the America part. And all of a sudden, there was all of a sudden this engagement from people saying, oh, you're a Muslim. How did you choose to do biochemistry, right? And to me, it didn't make sense. Like, why would my religion dictate something? And obviously, I just didn't understand the underlying philosophy behind the question. But my initial reactions were obviously very defensive. I never thought of it and was just like blabbering, like, da, 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 da. But as that progressed, I started realizing, I came to the point that, look, nobody has the right to question somebody's iman or somebody's religion based on their knowledge, right? And somebody would ask me that question and I'd say, listen, that's not a valid question. I've never heard you ask, you know, a Muslim male, like, you know, you're a male scientist, how is that? Or you're a Christian scientist, how is that, right? And that was my view. And then with the realities of life kicking in, I realized like that was my ideal world, and that's not the reality.
There were a
There
lot of
is,
prejudices in
right.
the real world.
But and if I wanted to address that, and if I really wanted to come to a point where somebody wouldn't ask me this question, I would need to start speaking up. I would need to start educating myself. I would need to start integrating that, right? So when I went to the US, I was very well prepared in this sense. Yes, there were lots of, Muslim women. We had an Islamic society. The university hosted our iftar, so it was very integrated. But there was this undertones still of religion and Islam, right? And the point, like I'd like to make here from, is that the one thing I learned at that time, and it's something I still hold very strongly, that it's very important for Muslims and non-Muslims to understand that there are world-class scientists out there, right? I mean, the one I can think of is the chair of the Department of Evolution at McGill, right? Evolution being one of the most controversial topics we can talk about with science and religion, who not only understand science, but they've questioned what it means for their iman and their faith, right? And I think this is very important for our non-Muslims viewers, because again, the sharing of knowledge is something that brings about tolerance, and is something we've talked about, and understanding. And more so for the Muslim world, I think it's really important for us to understand this and engage in this dialogue of what our religion says about Islam. Because unfortunately, the Islamic world we've been left behind, right, when it comes to science, technology, and innovation. Right. And it's not about competing with the West or what it means. It's got implications, right? What does it mean when you don't have a foundation or a culture in the sciences and technologies, right? It means you don't have the latest medicines. It means you're not saving a human life. It means it's affecting your religion.
Right. Did you?
Right? So it's
Yeah.
an important factor for us to, I think,
Well, there are a lot of
value.
women, Muslim women students at Yale when you were there.
A few,
A few.
not the majority, but
Right.
we were a few.
But there
And
was an
like I said, we
awareness. There was
were
an increased
integrated.
awareness. Did you see that? Did you see Muslims generally when you interact with Muslims? Did you see a desire for knowledge amongst them?
So again, good leaders make the difference. So our chaplain, the imam, was a very young, dynamic leader who actually spoke up about, what it meant to be Islam, and how was it different, or how is it a way of living, right? And how we could live that life on while pursuing what we wanted to do.
Right. Right.
So we were a small community, but we had a voice.
And you're dynamic.
We were dynamic, and I think we all had this understanding that you need to speak up.
Dr. Uzma is a very prolific writer, and she's written an op-ed which is really refreshing and evocative. The title was Finding Meaning in Relationships and Equity. Equity, fairness and impartiality, Dr. Husma. So just to pick up on some certain salient quotations from that op-ed, Dr. Husma talks about power of words on healing relationships and setting examples for younger generations, and that she ascribes to a philosophy of standing strong in your purpose. Please tell us more on that.
Wow. So this op-ed was written at a time that I had just come back from a mission across West Africa during the Ebola outbreak. So I'd been, spent 6 months away at the peak of the epidemic, and I traveled through Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Liberia, right?
Let me just cut you there. Do you enjoy putting yourself in danger?
It's a blessing when you realize what you have and what the other side looks like, it's a true blessing. And being able to do the little you can, it's a very satisfying feeling. And it's, I can't tell you how much I've learned about myself, about the practice of public health, but also about human beings in general being exposed to these and interacting with some of the most vulnerable in our community. So I'd say it's a blessing. I know my family worries about it, but it's truly a gift.
So standing strong in your purpose.
So, like I said, so this was the time I had just come back from West Africa, and having seen some really horrific things happening, right? We had situations where Muslim families, Christian families that buried their loved ones all of a sudden were so terrified that they left them on the roadsides to be put in body bags and actually cremated. Right? So it was a very
These were the victims of Ebola.
Ebola, right? So it was a moment that I'd come out of, and I had to really think deeply of what my practice of global health meant. And luckily, as things would happen, I got selected to be part of this op-ed project. And then the op-ed project is a project based across the entire United States, and it's a project started by some of the top journalists, right? We have Pulitzer Prize winners, we have editors of the New York Times, we have all sorts of people who came together and decided that they needed to share their skill set with leaders in different fields so that opinions can be more nuanced, but also that there can be the share of knowledge. So having combined these two opportunities, I just had this, good thing in Ebola that all of a sudden, one of the first times, made me think about what does my practice mean. And then I had this opportunity to write, and when we came to this project, it was like a room full of us, of about 15 of us, all chosen from different fields. And, I remember talking to my colleagues, and it was like, okay, we write every day in our lives. It just might be like, taking out the scientific facts and just making it more non-technical. But to our surprise, we were challenged to understand what our actions meant. Right? And again, I'll give you an example with Corona, right? We've put down these lockdowns. It's a policy, but what does it mean? Right? I saw what it means in Sierra Leone. Right? I had a situation where we were called into a slum area, a total little hut. There was a little girl, right, no more than 13, very, very poor, like in rags, had just lost a sister, and it was very obvious to us she had touched the sister's body, right? And at that time, it was, if you touch somebody who's dead, you're taken to jail, or you put a fine. That was our policy, right? And I remember her breaking down and crying, and obviously, as I said, passed from Ebola. And we took her aside, and once I started engaging her in the conversation, her point was, she's like, I didn't want the foreigners, the non-family members, to come see her in the state she was, so I dressed her. Right? This is somebody who had no money, right? This was their last dress, but this was the consequences of our action, where she was left in a room to dress her loved one alone so that foreigners could not see her in that state. So it was her way of giving her respect. Right. Right. So we had experienced all this, and then we had this opportunity, and it became very obvious that these were the stories we had to say. Right. So it was very obvious for us to be able to say these stories. We had to be honest, or to the people we were writing about, to the subject we were writing about, but also to ourselves, right? And at that time, I started questioning what is it about public health that gets me, right? Why am I there? Right? Why do some of the most vulnerable people let us into their lives? And to me, it was this concept of equity. And the more I started looking into this and understanding, it became very obvious it was a concept that I had grown up with thanks to my religion of, our Muslim religion. Like if you think of zakat, right, that's a portion of equity. Everybody gives a proportion for social justice, right? That was, if you think of the first person who gave azan, it wasn't our prophet, it was a
Sallallahu Alaihi
freed
Wasallam. Yeah.
slave, right?
Sayyidina Bilal. Radiallahu anhu.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, hold behold, the same azan was given my great grandfather who'd left his home country and come and formed a small mosque in Nakuru, right? So Cradle of Mankind. It was the same azan that I was hearing in the US. Right, so that was the beauty of equity that had been brought by our religion.
So you saw how strongly equity is upheld, how much it is foregrounded in the Islamic faith. Yeah. You also in your op-ed, and if I could just read this quotation, you said, quote, "Jihad against inequity in the world as taught to me by my religion of 1.6 billion people. Global health, you said that global health is your jihad against inequity in the world as taught to me by my religion of 1.6 billion people," end of quote. This is, you're writing in an American publication. You use the word jihad. Was this done to clarify? It was because this is a bold step as far as I'm concerned. This is not conventional.
Thank you.
So why did you use the word jihad?
So I think it fit in perfectly with everything we've talked about, right? So one was it was me standing strong in my purpose, right? Two was something we started this whole conversation with was you need to speak up. You need to speak up about your religion, right? And three was what the op-ed was there for bringing these different voices in and to clarify the concepts we have, right? And that's why I literally said, I remember in one of the paragraphs that jihad, which literally means a personal struggle, but which has been hijacked by the Western world to mean something very different. So yes, it was a word that was intentionally put in there. It was not necessarily to incite the West, but it was more to educate, and it was a word that I really meant the actual meaning. It was a word I was standing strong in my.
Right. And I think it worked out very well in the tapestry of all aspects of your life that you talk about, all the different experiences that you went through, not only as far as your career was concerned, the prejudices that you came across, your relationship with your deen as well. You talk about Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi as well.
I do.
And you have an extremely potent quote in your op-ed: "Raise your words, not voice. It is rain that grows flowers, not thunder." It's interesting that Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi talks about listening. In one of his works in the Masnavi, the work actually starts with the word listen. And it's a peculiar thing that, balance is to be found in the ears. People these days are not ready to listen. They would like to talk over each other. They would like to make their opinions heard. They are impressed by their own opinions. Listening is something that if we did, maybe there would be a balance in life. Maybe that is an aspect of equity as well. And our Prophet ﷺ used to listen to individuals. He would give so much attention, so much focus to a person who came to him, so much so that they thought that they were the most important person to the Prophet ﷺ at that time. So I guess it sort of blends in very. It's relatable. It can translate into what you talk about. Having the sense of a balance in life. We seem to have lost balance these days, which is why everything is topsy-turvy. You have situations which are beyond our control. You have viruses which are going haywire. Man has a lot to blame. Man has a lot to answer for that, especially with our resources and with what's playing out in the world today. Dr. Uzma, I would request you to give some words of advice to youngsters, to young women, Muslim women, not only the young, the not so young as well, about achieving, about going out, setting goals for yourself, about being able to achieve those goals, and about what deen, our religion, what the impact that has on what you choose for yourself.
So let me start with the last piece first, right? The impact Dean has. I think for me, like I said, you know, one of the first words I remember taught by my mom was read, Ikra, right? And now if I connect that to what my Dean means for me, it's a Dean of that encourages seeking knowledge, right? So if you've got that command from someone way high above, that's all you need, right? From there, it takes courage, believe in your dreams, and take the opportunities as they come. You obviously, I know people say, you know, you need to plan, have plan A, plan B, plan C. It might work for some, but if you have the faith and you know how to balance it, I promise you things will work out. Just go do it.
Right. And
And the other, I think, really important and key thing I'd like to say, especially to our younger generation, is that it's very easy to lose yourself within the weeds. And a compass that always brings you back, at least that brought me back, was the fact that I didn't want to let down my community or my family or my religion. And in line with that, you know, there's this whole thing of how Islam is a way of life. But again, like, what's the application of it? What does it mean? And again, I was very lucky to have such a powerful mom, my mother in my life, who's taught me these, what it means, what the practice is, right? And I can give you solid examples of this, right? So apart from being able to learn some of the surahs I did while she driving me to school, there was a very powerful thing that she installed in me and said, you know, if you're ever dressed in such a way that you can't say your salah, you're not dressed appropriately. All of a sudden, it became a way of my life, right? We talked about my marathon. I never thought religion would have anything to do with my marathon, right? It was my first marathon. It was my last 5Ks. And I knew if I stopped, that would be the point my body would stop running. And all of a sudden, I remembered my mom's words: just say anything, just say Allah's name, say whatever you want to, right? And all of a sudden, that got me into rhythm, right? So anybody out there, I'd say, you know, look, translate your religion to work for you. You can believe in your roots. And if, you know, if it's our Quran gives us, our religion gives us the right and the desire to go seek, but most importantly, you said something about young women, any woman out there. I know we've heard about Islam says, you know, we're suppressed, we're X, we're Y, we're Z. I would like to remind them, just remember, our religion says that Jannah, paradise, is at the feet of a woman, right? That is your power. So don't be astray by anything, right? This is not me saying it, this is our religion saying it. So that's how powerful you are, and that's what you can do. So believe in yourself, have faith, and just go do it.
super
Life is beautiful.
excellent, excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Uzma Alam. So, just to recap, viewers, Dr. Alam talked about the importance of education in her early life, how a broad education in Kenya helped her lead a balanced life, helped her propel herself forward. She talked about having family support, encouraging parents. She talked about parents and family who are allies with her in trying to bring down cultural barriers, in trying to bring down cultural obstacles, in achieving the full potential of her life. Planning was not very important for her, as she said, in public health. But, however, she said, if you have courage, if you believe in your deen, these are qualities that are intractable in propelling you forward, in leading you to your desired goals. These are qualities, these are virtues that open up avenues for you. Religion was the compass in her life. It guided her when things did not seem clear. Money was not important. Money was not a concern for her. The service to humanity, equity was important for her, trying to bring about a balance, trying to bring about fairness, justice in the imbalance that she saw around her, imbalance based on gender, on socioeconomic conditions, on religion. So these were the important aspects, these were the guiding principles in her life, which have brought her to the place that she is at, which have allowed her to achieve, mashallah, sterling accolades in her life. We hope that we have brought about some of the important points, some of the important cornerstones that we can rely upon, that we can relate to, that we can refer to in our own struggles as we move forward. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.